Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm the volunteer manager at the Mini Time Machine Museum of Miniatures. And today I'm sitting by the Three Bears house because I would like to share with you the book Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This book's been written by Lauren Child. Her friend Emily Jenkins made miniatures for the story, and Polly Borland photographed all the miniatures for the story. Once upon a time, on the edge of a big, dark forest, there lived a girl named Goldilocks. You've probably heard of her, and if so, you will know these three things. She was small, her hair was all golden and curly, and she looked like one of those very good children who never ever seemed to get into any trouble. Well, the truth is, Goldilocks did get into trouble. Quite a lot, in fact. Not because she was bad, but because her curiosity always got the better of her. Now, if you have a little curiosity, that could be a wonderful thing. That's how we learn. But if you have too much, you can get into trouble. And Goldilocks had too much. Her mother often worried about letting Goldilocks out of her sight, but sometimes the little girl would ask just one too many questions and stick her fingers in one too many pots of honey and peek under the lid of one too many saucepans. And her mother, unable to bear it any longer, would send her out to collect firewood. This was just such a morning, and as Goldilocks slipped through the gate, her mother called after her. "Remember these three things, Goldilocks. Do not stray from the path. Be back in time for breakfast, and whatever you do, make sure you look after your little red shoes." "Oh, I will, Mother," called out Goldilocks, and she meant it. Well, the bit about her little red shoes, anyway. Off Goldilocks skipped, picking a flower here and looking down a rabbit hole there, lifting up pebbles and peering into tree trunks, but all the while she remembered her mother's words, and she stayed on the path. Well, at least until she saw a little blue bird pick up a snow-white feather and fly off into the trees. "Oh," thought Goldilocks, "I wonder where he's going with that feather." She couldn't help herself, and she ran through the forest after him. So intent was she on following the bird that she didn't notice how far she had run, nor how thick the trees had become, until the bird was long gone, and the path was well and truly lost. Goldilocks stood all alone in the middle of the forest. All Goldilocks could hear were the leaves rustling and the birds chirping, and well, something was buzzing. Zzz. "I wonder who's making that noise," thought Goldilocks, and she followed the buzzing until she came to a clearing where the sun shone down. There, right in the middle of the trees, stood a curious wooden cottage, and next to it, 3 wooden beehives, each of them surrounded by lots of buzzing bees. "How strange to find a cottage right in the middle of the forest. I wonder why I've never seen this cottage before," thought Goldilocks, stretching up to peep through the tiny glass window. She had to stand on her tippy toes, and even then she couldn't quite see, so she climbed up onto a flower pot, and her shoes got all muddy. "Oh dear," said Goldilocks, "I said I would look after my little red shoes. Perhaps whoever lives in this house will help me clean them." So she knocked on the door. Dish, dish, dish. There was no answer. So she peeped through the keyhole. "No one would mind if I had a look. I wouldn't mind if this were my house." So she turned the handle and went inside. "Hello?" called out Goldilocks. "Hello? Hello?" But no one answered, and Goldilocks smiled because she secretly hoped that no one would be in. "What a tidy little room," said Goldilocks out loud, and as she said so, she bumped into a bucket of apples which tumbled onto the floor. She didn't have a chance to pick them up because something rather curious had caught her eye. "How strange," she said, stepping over the apples. "There seem to be 3 of everything. There are 1, 2, 3 chairs, and 1, 2, 3 bowls, and 1, 2, 3 spoons. So I guess 3 people must live in this house." Well, she was almost right. You see, the tiny cottage didn't belong to 3 people, but surprisingly, if you don't already know it, it belonged to 3 bears. A large father bear, a middle-sized mother bear, and a small little baby bear. I know it's strange to find bears living in a little wooden cottage in the middle of this forest, but this is a fairy tale, and strange things happen in fairy tales. Every morning, the 3 bears liked to go for a little walk before breakfast. It really gave them an appetite, and it also gave their porridge a chance to cool down. Bears do not like to burn their tongues. The bears never bothered to lock their front door because who would walk into a bear's house uninvited? Well, the answer is someone who didn't know it was a bear's house. The porridge smelled very good, and Goldilocks was feeling rather hungry. She looked at the table, and she looked back at the door, and she looked right at the porridge. One little taste wouldn't be so bad. They won't even notice, especially if I take a taste from this large bowl. And picking up the biggest spoon, she dipped it into the biggest bowl. Ouch, she cried. That's way too hot. Maybe this middle-sized bowl would be nicer. Ugh. Oh no, said Goldilocks. That's way too cold. How can anyone eat cold porridge? Perhaps if I tried this smaller bowl, that might be better. And it was. In fact, it was just right. In fact, it was so just right that she had another bite and another bite and another bite until, oh no, it was all gone. Well, never mind. There are 2 more bowls. They can share. I would share if it were my porridge. Said Goldilocks, looking around the room. I wouldn't mind a little sit down. I'm actually feeling a little bit too full. What a big chair. I would love to sit on that chair. But she didn't like it at all. It was too tall and too wobbly. Well, maybe I'll sit on that middle-sized chair. She sat down with a thud. Ouch. That's too low. Well, maybe that small chair is more my size, said Goldilocks as she sat down in the smallest chair. This is just perfect for me. But it wasn't, and the chair broke into 3 pieces and Goldilocks tumbled onto the floor. Oh dear, said Goldilocks. Well, it was an accident. I don't suppose anyone would mind if they knew it was an accident. As Goldilocks picked herself up off the floor, she caught sight of a twisty wooden staircase. Stairs? I wonder why I haven't noticed these before. The answer is because she was too busy eating other people's porridge and breaking other people's furniture to have possibly noticed the little staircase winding up through the house. I wonder what's up there, she whispered. Well, I think she knew very well what was up there because most people do. But you see, Goldilocks just wanted to see for herself. And so she climbed the stairs 3 at a time, snagging her stripy woolen stockings on the stairs as she went. I'm sure you'll not be surprised to hear that at the top of the stairs she found a bedroom. And in that bedroom were 3 neatly made beds covered in 3 neat quilts with 3 plump feather pillows. What a dear little room, said Goldilocks, looking around. If this were my house, I would sleep in the biggest bed. But it wasn't as comfortable as it looked. Too hard, complained Goldilocks. You'd think she would have learned by now. Well, maybe that middle-sized bed will be more bouncy. And it was, but it was too bouncy and made her feel a little dizzy. Too soft. I suppose that little bed might be the one for me. And, as I'm sure you've already guessed it, it was, oh yes, just right, said Goldilocks, slipping under the covers. I'm so terribly, terribly sleepy. Maybe I'll lie down just for 3 minutes. I'd better take my shoes off, though, she said, noticing the mud she had quite forgotten to clean off her shoes. So she carefully placed her little red shoes neatly by the side of the bed and fell soundly asleep. When the bears came back from their walk, they were very, very hungry. They all sniffed the air, but it wasn't porridge they could smell. You see, the bears have very keen noses, and right away they could sniff a very different smell. They looked around. Father Bear noticed at once that something was quite wrong. Things are not as they should be, said Father Bear, picking up an apple. Father Bear walked over to the table and looked into his bowl, and he picked up his spoon. Who has been eating my porridge? Said Mother Bear. Who has been eating my porridge? Said Small Bear. Who's been eating my porridge? And look, they gobbled it all up. A large tear welled up in Small Bear's eye and rolled down his little face. He was a sensitive type, and he also loved porridge. Father Bear looked around to see if he could see where that greedy whoever it was might be, but what he saw was his chair, and he wasn't too pleased. Who has been sitting in my chair? Father Bear did not like people sitting in his chair. Mother Bear looked at her chair and wasn't very pleased either. Who has been sitting in my chair? And Small Bear was the least pleased of all because he no longer even had a chair. Who's been sitting in my chair? And look, they broke it all into pieces. Mother Bear looked around, and what she saw was a thread of black wool winding up the stairs. Things are not as they should be, said Mother Bear, picking up the end of the woolen thread. The 3 bears started to climb the stairs. purred, but Goldilocks did not stir, not even a lock of her golden hair, so soundly was she sleeping. When the bears got to the top of the stairs, they listened very carefully. Bears have very sensitive ears, but all they could hear was a tiny, tiny sound, like the sound of a sleeping mouse. Father Bear looked at his bed. Who has been sleeping in my bed? He snarled. Mother Bear looked at her bed. The quilt was all ruffled, the pillow unplumped. Who has been sleeping in my bed? She growled. Well, whispered Small Bear, who's been sleeping in my bed? And look, they're still here. And all three bears peered at the sleeping girl lying in Small Bear's bed, and they growled. And exactly then, Goldilocks woke from her slumber to see 3 differently sized bears staring down at her. Now, Goldilocks was a curious girl, but she wasn't curious enough to strike up a conversation with bears. Goldilocks sprang from the bed, and quick as quick, she jumped out of the window. And happily for her, it wasn't too big of a drop, and she ran and she ran and she ran as fast as she could back to her cottage on the edge of the forest. I can tell you her mother wasn't too pleased because Goldilocks had missed breakfast, not that Goldilocks minded because she was still quite full of porridge, and she was so relieved to be home in one piece that she didn't even mind being sent to her room. But she had forgotten 2 little things. She had forgotten her 2 little red shoes. When her mother realized this, she was extremely cross, as you might imagine, and Goldilocks was very sad because she loved her little red shoes, but Small Bear, well, he was very happy indeed. Mother Bear made him some more porridge. Father Bear mended his chair, and Small Bear had an almost brand new pair of little red shoes to wear for his walk before breakfast. And they all lived happily ever after. Stories are told in so many different ways, and in my experience, I've seen stories on the big screen, like movies. I've heard stories told to me by my friends and my family. People even create miniatures about their favorite stories. Notice how the creator of this miniature tells the story of the 3 bears without any words. From the woodland setting to the little details, like the spilt porridge and the rumpled beds, the recognizable characters let us know what story this scene is from. If you were to create a story, how would you create your story? Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for letting me share one of my favorite stories with you. And we hope to see you soon at the Mini Time Machine Museum of Miniatures. And we also hope that you keep on reading your favorite stories.